Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Imagine for a second signing a contract that dictates your finances, your physical autonomy, and honestly, your spiritual standing before God.
Yeah.
But, and here's the catch, the contract is basically written in a 1,400-year-old legal language that you barely even understand.
Which is wild, right?
It is wild. And today, like, thousands of young Muslims are doing exactly that. I mean, they are stepping into one of the most profound commitments a human being can make, and they're treating it either as this dry, bureaucratic checklist or, even worse, just a cultural preamble to a massive party.
Yeah, just the paperwork before the caterers arrive. And that is, it's just a terrifying way to approach what classical Islamic jurisprudence, the fiqh, actually considers the absolute ultimate building block of human society.
Exactly.
We are dealing with an institution here that the Quran designates as imithakun galiza.
Imithakun galiza.
Right, which translates to a solemn, heavy covenant. I mean, it is one of the very few times that specific weighty phrasing is even used in the text.
Yeah, it's the exact phrasing used for the covenants made with the prophets, right?
Exactly.
So that immediately tells you, like, this isn't just a piece of paper you sign into the local civic center. It's this profound blending of ibadah, spiritual worship, with mu'amala, which is a really rigorous, detailed social contract.
It's both at the exact same time.
But, here is the real friction point we are tackling in our deep dive today.
Right.
We are looking at this ancient, sacred framework, but we're standing right in the middle of a modern minefield.
Oh, absolutely. A complete minefield.
We have young people navigating rapidly shifting gender dynamics.
Yeah.
We've got crippling global inflation. And of course, this weird era of instantaneous digital communication that just blurs every single traditional boundary.
And you have to add to that the incredibly complex reality of the Muslim diaspora in the West,
Right.
You have couples trying to figure out how a ruling that was formulated in 8th century Medina maps onto the life of, say, a modern medical student in London, or a recent convert in New York, or just a young couple staring down a severe cost of living crisis. Like, how do you honor the sacred law when the surrounding socioeconomic infrastructure completely ignores it?
And that is the exact mission of our deep dive today. I mean, we are unpacking an incredibly comprehensive document, the Sunni Nikah Fiqh Guidelines.
Which is just a brilliant text.
It really is.
Yeah.
And we are going to do this sequentially because the Shariah, it isn't a static relic, right? It's a dynamic architecture. But, you can't understand how the roof stays up if you don't actually understand the foundation.
You have to start at the bottom.
Exactly. So before we even look at the legal mechanics of the contract, the offer, the acceptance, the witnesses, we really have to start with the divine blueprint. We have to walk sequentially through the Quranic exegesis on marriage.
We need the why before the how. Because before you ever sit down with an imam or a judge to sign that document, you are making a fundamental choice about who you are aligning your entire life with.
Right.
And the Quran provides a very specific framework for that choice, beginning right out of the gate with Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 221.
Okay, let's get into it.
So this is the verse that commands believers not to marry polytheists until they believe.
Now, if we look at that verse purely on the surface, I mean, a modern critic might easily say, well, that's just ancient tribalism, just keep to your own group.
Which is how it's often misread.
Yeah. But when you actually dig into the psychology of it, it is establishing the absolute primacy of worldview alignment.
Absolutely. And our sources bring in Sheikh Zaid Shakir's modern framing on this, which is just brilliant. He looks at our current society and points out that we are completely obsessed with superficial metrics.
Well, very terribly.
When people look for a spouse today, they are filtering for accumulated wealth, physical aesthetics, lineage, even social media clout.
I mean, people are literally swiping based on a job title or a jawline.
Yeah.
It's a highly commodified approach to human relationships.
Exactly. And what Surah Al-Baqarah does is radically reorient that priority list. The prohibition against marrying outside the faith, and keeping in mind, the specific conditioned exception for men marrying chaste women of the people of the book, it's essentially a protective mechanism.
It's about the ecosystem, right?
Yes, the spiritual and psychological ecosystem of your future family.
Let's think about this practically for everyone listening. A shared worldview is basically the foundation of a skyscraper.
Okay, I like that.
You can have a couple who spends, all their time and money decorating the penthouse. They have the wealth, they have the looks, the curated vacation photos on Instagram.
But the penthouse decorations offer zero structural support.
None. They do nothing when the building shakes. And when the earthquake hits, and let's be real, it will hit.
It always does.
Whether it's sudden financial ruin or devastating chronic illness, or honestly just the monumental daily dilemma of how you raise children to have a moral compass in a hyper-secular world.
That's a huge one.
When that pressure hits the building, a shared definition of success, a shared definition of morality, and a shared belief in ultimate accountability in the afterlife, those are the only things preventing total collapse.
Right, because if your fundamental ideological baselines are misaligned, the marriage will inevitably fracture under that kind of pressure.
You just can't negotiate it.
No, you cannot negotiate a compromise between two completely incompatible realities when a crisis demands unified action. So the primary life lesson from this verse is that structural integrity requires a unified spiritual foundation.
Okay, so we establish the foundation of shared belief. That makes total sense. Then the Quranic blueprint moves us into Surah An-Nisa, verses 23 through 25. And this shifts the focus to boundaries, biological preservation, and human dignity.
Verse 23 is really heavy.
It is. It systematically dismantles the absolute marital chaos of the pre-Islamic era by strictly defining the mahram, the unmarriageable relatives.
Right.
But what really requires a massive pause here is how the fiqh handles radaha.
Milk kinship.
Milk kinship, which is just fascinating.
It is a fascinating intersection of biology, law, and sociology. In classical jurisprudence, nursing establishes permanent unmarriageability, functioning almost exactly like blood relations.
Like legally they are family.
Legally, the child who is nursed becomes the milk child of that woman and her husband. But the mechanics of how this is established are incredibly rigorous. Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani provides an exhaustive breakdown in the text.
So it's not just she fed the baby once, now they are family.
Not at all. The fiqh requires absolute measurable certainty because you are permanently altering legal rights and prohibitions.
Right.
So the child has to receive the milk during the designated days of infancy, usually the first 2 years. And depending on the madhab, the school of thought, it requires a specific quantity of milk. While like 5 distinct satisfying sucklings in the Shafi school, for example. If there is any doubt about the number of times or the volume, the legal prohibition is not established. It requires the strict evidentiary standards of a court.
Meaning you need actual witnesses.
Exactly, like the direct testimony of practicing Muslims who witnessed it.
Okay, let's bring this crashing into the modern era for you listening right now, because someone might think milk kinship is just some, historical footnote. But think about modern neonatal medicine.
Oh, this is such a good point.
Think about the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU, and the massive rise of donor milk banks. We have premature babies today whose survival literally depends on donated human milk.
And it creates a massive jurisprudential puzzle.
It really does.
Yeah.
When scholars look at these milk banks, they'll see a scenario where milk from dozens, sometimes hundreds, of anonymous women is pooled together, pasteurized, and distributed.
Which means if your infant is in the NICU receiving pooled donor milk, you have this anonymous, completely untrackable biological link being created.
Yeah, and decades later, you have 2 young adults who meet at a university, they fall in love, and they have absolutely no idea they both received milk from the same donor pool.
You risk an accidental incestuous marriage.
Which is terrifying.
It is. And this is why modern scholars emphasize the overarching objective, the maqasid of the Shariah, which here is the protection of lineage and familial boundaries.
Right.
Because the pooling of milk destroys the evidentiary standard of knowing exactly who the milk mother is, and because the volume from any specific woman is diluted and uncertain, many contemporary scholars actually issue fatwas stating that pooled milk does not establish the mahram prohibition.
Oh, interesting. So the pooling dilutes the legal weight.
Yes. However, and this is a big however, they mandate extreme vigilance. If direct one-to-one donation occurs outside a pool, parents are religiously obligated to track and record the biological source of that milk.
Wow. It just shows how a 1,400-year-old biological boundary applies directly to modern medical ethics. It's so relevant.
Completely relevant. And as Surah An-Nisa progresses into verses 24 and 25, the text transitions from biological boundaries to financial dignity.
Ah, the Mahr.
Yes, it introduces the Mahr, the mandatory dowry. And Sheikh Muhammad al-Yaqubi stresses a profound reframing of this concept in our sources.
Because it's so misunderstood today, right?
It is perhaps one of the most culturally corrupted concepts in the Muslim world today. Culturally, in so many places, it has morphed into a purchase price paid to a father, or just this vulgar display of wealth to intimidate the other family.
It becomes a flex.
It's a total flex. But Sheikh al-Yaqubi strips away that cultural baggage and returns us to the fiqh. The Mahr is the exclusive property of the woman. It is a profound symbol of her financial independence and her honor.
It establishes her agency from day one.
Exactly.
And verse 25 takes this concept of dismantling toxic cultural norms even further. It discusses the permissibility of marrying chaste bondwomen if a free man couldn't afford a free woman.
Now, obviously, the institution of bondage is legally obsolete today.
Of course.
Yeah.
But the source text pulls a timeless life lesson from this, which is the eradication of class-based arrogance.
Because classical society was violently stratified.
Yeah, marrying a bondwoman was hugely socially stigmatized. But by the Quran explicitly permitting and legislating it, it forces the believer to look beyond artificial social, ethnic, or socioeconomic stratifications.
It completely levels the playing field.
It tells you that piety and chastity are the true metrics of a spouse, not whether they come from a wealthy or so-called noble lineage.
Which perfectly sets up a verse that is honestly incredibly difficult for modern audiences to digest.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
Surah An-Nur, verse 32. The verse says, if they should be poor, Allah will enrich them from his bounty.
Okay, I have to stop here. Because telling a 24-year-old who is drowning in student debt, facing an impossible housing market, and struggling to buy groceries that Allah will enrich them sounds, frankly, completely out of touch.
It does.
I mean, have the scholars writing these texts seen the rent prices in major cities right now?
Look, it is the single biggest anxiety point for young Muslims today. The fear of getting married broke is literally paralyzing an entire generation.
Yes.
But Sheikh Mizamil Siddiqui's reflections on this verse offer a radical countercultural shift. He argues that we are actually misreading the verse by hyper-individualizing it.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, modern capitalism tells you that you are an isolated economic unit, right? Therefore, you must accumulate this massive fortress of wealth before you are, quote-unquote, ready to take on the liability of a spouse.
Right, you need the house, the car, the savings account.
Exactly. But the Quran rejects that isolation. This verse isn't just a magical promise to the broke 24-year-old. It is a divine mandate to the collective community.
Ah, so the burden isn't just on the individual couple.
Precisely. The community, so that's parents, extended family, local leaders, the mosque infrastructure. They are all responsible for facilitating the union. The divine promise that Allah will enrich them operates through the mechanisms of communal support, shared resources, and mutual aid. Sheikh Siddiqui points out that delaying marriage purely for wealth accumulation exposes youth to immense moral and psychological hazards.
I mean, it's a massive indictment of our wedding culture.
It really is.
If you are a parent and you're demanding that a young suitor have a six-figure salary, a house fully paid off, and like a $50,000 wedding budget before you can marry your daughter, you are not protecting her.
Yo, you're not.
You are pricing an entire generation out of a sunnah. You are placing these artificial financial barriers in front of a religious imperative. The community is actively failing the youth.
And that failure has devastating sociological consequences. But let's look at what happens when the community actually does facilitate the union. The Quran explains the internal psychological dynamics of that marriage in Surah Arum, verse 21.
This is such a beautiful verse.
It is. And of his signs is that he created for you from yourselves mates that you may find tranquility in them, and he placed between you affection and mercy.
This is the psychological architecture of the marriage. It's just brilliant. I know Sheikh Hamza Yusuf references this verse constantly in the text because it identifies the primary objective.
Yes.
The Arabic word is sakan, which means sanctuary or place of rest.
Think about the environment we live in today for a second. We are hyper-individualistic, totally digitized, driven by algorithmic outrage, constantly monitored.
That's exhausting.
We are an incredibly anxious, overstimulated society. And in that chaos, the spouse is divinely engineered to function as your sanctuary.
And what I find so compelling is the pragmatism of how that sanctuary is sustained. It's built on a dual engine system, right? Mawadda and Rama.
Passionate, affectionate love and deep, empathetic mercy.
Exactly. And why both?
Yeah.
Because passion is inherently volatile.
Right. Passion requires energy. It fluctuates based on biology, stress, lack of sleep, time.
Yeah, you map this onto a 40 or 50-year timeline. You get older, your bodies change. You have a screaming toddler at 3 a.m.
Someone gets laid off from their job.
A parent gets dementia and needs full-time care. That initial fiery mawada is going to dip under those conditions. It has to.
It inevitably will.
And that's exactly when the second engine, Ramah, activates. Mercy is the shock absorber. If a marriage is running purely on passion, the moment they hit a pothole, an illness, a financial loss, even just a petty argument, the chassis fractures.
It breaks apart.
But mercy allows you to forgive minor transgressions. Right. To care for a sick spouse when it's definitely not glamorous. To hold the sanctuary together when the passion is temporarily exhausted.
It is a supremely realistic view of human endurance.
It really is.
And that realism extends even to the dissolution of the contract.
Yeah, we have to talk about that.
Because the Quran doesn't pretend every marriage succeeds. In Surah Al-Ahzab verses 49 through 52, we get acute legal precision regarding separation, specifically divorce before consummation.
This segment of the fiqh demands an astonishing level of emotional intelligence.
It really does.
It dictates that if a marriage is dissolved before it is consummated, there is no waiting period, no ida for the woman. The legal tie is severed immediately. But the text mandates that the man must provide a gracious release.
A financial gift and a dignified exit.
Yes.
Sheikh Absolute bin Muhammad al-Mutlaq highlights the profound psychology here. When a contract is dissolved before it even truly begins, the emotional atmosphere is toxic.
Oh, it's awful.
It is usually a moment of intense anger, feelings of betrayal, public embarrassment, wounded egos. Yet the fiqh dictates that at the exact moment of maximum anger, ethical grace-isan is legally and morally mandated.
You cannot weaponize your anger. This is a direct divine warning against the vindictive divorce culture we see all over the place today.
We see it everywhere.
We see people weaponizing the secular justice system, dragging ex-spouses through years of malicious litigation, destroying each other on social media. I mean, it's relentless.
It is.
And the Quran is instituting a hard stop. You must part with the exact same dignity that initiated the union. Your character is being judged precisely when it is hardest to maintain it.
So we have the divine blueprint, right? We have worldview alignment, biological boundaries, financial dignity, communal responsibility, psychological sanctuary, and ethical separation.
That's so comprehensive.
But the immediate practical question for you, the listener, is how do you actually find this person?
Yeah, where do we start?
How do you navigate courtship without crossing those ethical lines, especially today?
Well, this brings us to part 2 of our deep dive, premarital fiqh, courtship in the digital age. Because, let's be honest, the mechanics of meeting someone have completely transformed. We have to talk about the bounds of interaction and the concept of khalwa.
Yes. Khalwa in classical jurisprudence is defined as unlawful physical seclusion between a non-mahram man and woman in a space where they cannot be easily observed or interrupted.
Right.
It's prohibited not because the act of sitting in a room is inherently evil, but because it is a definitive precursor to transgression.
It's the mechanism of isolation, right? I always compare it to locking a door. It's a precursor. But when we look at modern interactions, scholars like Sheikh Abdullah bin Baya analyze the clash of legal maxims here.
Oh, this is a great point.
You have the maxim that the origin of things is permissibility, clashing with the maxim that the origin of intergender interactions is impermissibility unless expressly permitted.
Right, and they synthesize this by stating that interactions must be purposeful, transparent, dignified, and professional.
But the real frontier, and this is where it gets crazy, is how we define seclusion today. What happens when the door is virtual?
Dr. Jihad Brown offers a critical insight here in the text. He expands the definition of khalwa to the digital realm by looking at the maqasid, the overarching objectives.
Okay.
The objective of prohibiting khalwa is the preservation of honor, physical boundaries, and emotional integrity.
So we aren't just talking about being locked in a physical room anymore. We are talking about the psychological fuse of a digital interface. Think about late-night texting. It's not a locked physical door. It's an emotional echo chamber.
When you are texting a prospective spouse at 2 a.m. or having a private 3-hour FaceTime call, the screen acts as a false shield.
Yes.
You feel physically safe because you are thousands of miles apart, so your inhibitions just completely drop.
You bypass all the normal social checkpoints. You artificially accelerate emotional intimacy. You start sharing your deepest trauma, your secrets, building this intense vulnerability.
And Dr. Brown argues this is digital seclusion. You are violating the spirit of the prohibition because you are burning out the relationship's oxygen before the contract is even signed.
Wow.
True reliance on the divine means relinquishing the need for that illicit premarital validation. You have to protect the emotional integrity of the future marriage by not exhausting it in the DMs.
Not exhausting it in the DMs. That is incredibly well said. And this ties perfectly into the formal process of selection.
Yeah.
The kitbah, the proposal, and the nazar, the look.
Yes, the prophetic tradition is highly pragmatic here. It strongly encourages a man to look at the woman he intends to marry, and vice versa, to ensure there is mutual physical attraction.
It grounds the future contract in physical reality.
Exactly, preventing future resentment.
But the crucial legal boundary that is just constantly violated today is that an engagement, a kippah, holds absolute zero legal weight in Islamic law.
None whatsoever.
It is nothing more than a promise to marry in the future. They are still entirely non-mahram. They are legally strangers.
Which means the modern illusion of halal dating is a jurisprudential fiction.
Thank you. I mean, you have couples who use the label of engaged to act married.
Right. They travel unchaperoned, they engage in physical touch, they go on private weekend trips.
And the fiqh is explicitly clear here. You cannot claim the privileges of the contract without assuming the binding responsibilities of the contract.
That is the perfect transition. Let's actually talk about the contract itself.
Yes, part 3. The mechanics of the Nikah contract. We are stepping into the room where it happens, and this is a highly sophisticated legal agreement with 5 specific pillars, or arkan.
And if one pillar is missing, the marriage is batil.
Void.
Step 1 is the offer and acceptance, ijab and qabul. This is the undeniable core of the contract.
The verbal exchange.
Yes, it is the verbal exchange of consent, demonstrating absolute free will. The ijab, the offer, traditionally comes from the bride's guardian or his deputized representative, like the imam.
Right.
And the qabul, the acceptance, comes immediately from the groom.
And the mechanics of this are strict.
Yeah.
Right. The fiqh dictates this must happen in the exact same sitting, the majlis.
It has to.
Because if the offer is made and the groom says, let me think about it and get back to you tomorrow, the continuity of consent is broken. There has to be an immediate, clear, verbal confirmation. But honestly, the linguistics of this exchange are where things get heavily misunderstood today.
Yes, and Sheikh Mohammed Al-Hassan Al-Dadu provides a vital linguistic analysis in the sources to clear this up. Oh, good.
Because classical jurists sometimes categorize the Nikah structurally, similarly to a contract of exchange, to explain the transfer of rights, a gross misconception arose. Critics and sometimes even uneducated Muslims assume the woman is being purchased.
Which is horrifying. But Al-Dadu completely dismantles this, right?
He does. He clarifies that the Nikah is not a transfer of ownership. It is not a commercial transaction where a human being is the commodity.
No.
It is a sacred agreement that establishes the mutual permissibility of intimacy and enforces lifelong financial and social responsibilities. It establishes rights. It does not buy a person.
Which leads us to step 2, and arguably the most complex and debated aspect of modern applied fiqh, the guardian or the wali.
Yes.
Because the purpose of the wali is to protect the woman from predatory men, to ensure compatibility, and to provide the backing of her family's social and financial weight.
But the major schools of thought have a massive split here.
They really do. Let's break that down for the listeners. Okay, so the vast majority, the Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools, rule that the Nikah is fundamentally invalid without the explicit consent and physical presence of the bride's wali.
And the authority usually prioritizes the father, then the grandfather, then brothers, and so on.
Exactly. But the Hanafi school breaks from this consensus.
Okay.
The Hanafi school posits that an adult, sane woman possesses the full legal capacity to contract her own marriage without a wali.
Oh, wow.
However, and this is a massive caveat that often gets ignored, she is required to marry someone of suitable standing and compatibility, a concept known as kafa.
Wait, why does the Hanafi school rely so heavily on kafa?
Because it acts as the socioeconomic balance. If a woman contracts her own marriage without her family's input, but she marries someone severely unsuitable, say a known criminal or someone who simply cannot financially support her, the family retains the legal right to object.
So they can intervene.
Yes, they can petition a judge to dissolve the marriage to protect the family from disgrace and protect her from ruin.
Okay, so bringing this to the modern listener, especially highly educated, financially independent women who are listening right now, the immediate question is, does the mandatory wali requirement of the majority schools infantilize modern women?
It's the question everyone asks, and Sheikh Dr. Ali Goma addresses this friction brilliantly in the text.
What does he say?
He explains that modern administrative systems and secular personal status laws actually synthesize these classical views. The laws are designed to protect women from familial coercion because, let's be absolutely clear, forced marriages are strictly, categorically haram in Islam.
A woman's consent is absolute.
Absolute. But simultaneously, the law acknowledges a woman's intellectual agency. She runs corporations, she holds public office.
Right.
Ali Goma argues that modern state registration acts as a protective layer that aligns with her autonomy while still acknowledging the protective network of the family.
It's a balance of individual agency and structural safety.
Exactly.
But let's look at what happens when that structural safety doesn't exist. The sources bring up a really specific scenario, the convert's dilemma.
This is a vital point.
Imagine a female convert living in a Western city. Her family is loving, they are supportive, but they are not Muslim. The classical consensus dictates her non-Muslim father cannot serve as her Islamic wali because the guardian must share her faith to fully comprehend the religious and legal weight of the Islamic contract.
So she's seemingly left without an advocate.
Right. But this is where the jurisprudence of Muslim minorities activates. In the absence of a Muslim male relative, the authority transfers to the wali al-amr.
The guardian by authority.
Yes, which in a minority context is the local imam or Islamic judge.
And this isn't just a bureaucratic workaround, it's a profound safety net for her.
It really is. The imam steps in to ensure she is not isolated during negotiations. She has a knowledgeable advocate making sure her mahr is fair and her rights are stipulated.
And crucially, the imam ensures her religious contract is linked to secular legal protections, like signing civil documents.
Yes. She is adopted by the communal authority when she lacks the traditional familial one.
That communal protection ties directly into step 3, just witnesses, or shuhud. Because to elevate the nikah from a private illicit tryst to a socially recognized protected institution, you must have witnesses.
A secret marriage in Islam is invalid.
Completely invalid. The mechanics are specific. You need 2 sane adult Muslim males, or in the Hanafi school, 1 male and 2 females, who physically hear the offer and acceptance simultaneously.
And Dr. Saad bin Nasser al-Shathri emphasizes the socio-legal reasoning here, right?
Right.
Witnesses prevent fraudulent claims of marriage, they safeguard the purity of lineage, and they protect the couple from societal scandal.
But the sources emphasize a vital modern evolution of this step, which is so important for the diaspora.
What's that?
Historically, the testimony of the witnesses in a Shariah court was enough to enforce the contract. Today, in a secular state, religious witnesses have no state authority.
Oh, right. Because the state doesn't recognize the religious contract alone.
Exactly. Therefore, ensuring those religious witnesses also sign the civil marriage certificates is practically a religious duty now. It acts as a dual layer of protection.
Because we have seen horrifying cases, I mean truly awful cases, where a man marries a woman Islamically, refuses to sign civil papers, and then when he decides to leave her, he denies the marriage ever happened in secular court just to evade his financial duties.
And without the civil registration, she has no legal recourse. The paper trail is the modern equivalent of the just witness.
Which brings us to the financial duties. Step 4, the mandatory gift, the mahr or sadak.
This is an uncompromisable financial right of the bride. It can be prompt, meaning paid immediately at the signing, or deferred, meaning a portion is delayed as a safety net for the future, payable upon death or divorce.
But Sheikh Salah Al-Fawzan offers a severe critique of what this has become. We are seeing a toxic cultural innovation across the Muslim world and the diaspora.
It's an epidemic.
It really is. Families are demanding astronomical, extravagant dowries. They want gold, they want property, massive cash transfers. These demands are financially crippling young men and severely delaying marriages across the board.
It is a complete inversion of the prophetic tradition.
Exactly. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, explicitly stated that the most blessed marriages are the simplest in their financial demands.
And Sheikh Al-Dadu reminds us of the linguistic root of the alternative word for dowry, sadak. It is derived from the root word for sincerity and truthfulness.
Sincerity. It's an expression of the groom's sincerity and his capability to provide, not a price tag. When families demand these massive, showy sums just to impress their neighbors, they turn a sacred covenant into a vulgar commercial transaction.
It completely strips the barakah, the divine blessing, from the union.
It really does. But, you know, if there's a remedy to the power imbalances in these contracts, it is found in step 5.
Yeah.
The stipulations, or shurut. This is the ultimate built-in protection mechanism. And honestly, I found this part of the text absolutely breathtaking.
It's the most empowering part of the fiqh.
The Hanbali school champions this concept of freedom of contract, as long as a condition doesn't contradict the primary essence of marriage. So, for example, you cannot stipulate that there will be no physical intimacy or that the husband doesn't have to provide maintenance, but outside of that, you can append highly specific conditions to the nikah.
It is incredibly empowering. You are legally writing your rights into the religious framework.
And Mufti Muhammad Taqi Usmani is a massive advocate for utilizing this today, especially for women living in minority contexts where there are no formal state-backed Shariah courts to enforce Islamic law if things go wrong.
He specifically advocates for a mechanism called talaq al-tafwid, delegated divorce.
Let's walk through the mechanics of this because every listener needs to understand how this works. It's so crucial. We look at the suspended woman scenario in the text, known in Arabic as the mu'allaka.
Right.
Imagine a female medical student. She wants to pursue her residency, but she is terrified of the horror stories.
And we all know them.
We do. She knows women whose husbands became abusive, and when the women sought a civil divorce, the husband spitefully refused to grant the Islamic divorce.
It leaves the woman religiously suspended. She's civilly divorced, but Islamically still tied to her abuser. She cannot remarry.
It is a horrific form of religious hostage-taking.
It is abuse, plain and simple.
But through talaq al-tafwid, she can proactively dismantle this threat before she even signs the contract.
Yes, she can.
When negotiating the nikah, she writes a stipulation granting herself the explicit right to work and complete her education. Furthermore, she writes in a conditional clause, if her husband becomes physically abusive, or if he financially abandons her for a period of, say, 6 months, she has the delegated unilateral right to pronounce the Islamic divorce upon herself.
Let's clarify the mechanism here because it's brilliant. The husband intrinsically holds the right of divorce in classical fiqh. Through this stipulation, he is delegating that exact right to her, triggered by specific conditions.
She triggers her own release. If he hits her, she doesn't have to beg a diaspora Shariah council to investigate and grant her a khul.
No.
She invokes her stipulated right, pronounces the divorce, and the religious tie is severed simultaneously with her secular divorce.
She retains her autonomy and, depending on the wording, her financial rights.
It uses classical 1,000-year-old fiqh to solve a uniquely modern crisis of stateless religious enforcement.
It proves that the law is dynamic enough to protect the vulnerable if the community is educated enough to use it.
Exactly. Education is everything. Okay, so the contract is ironclad, the rights are secured, the stipulations are signed. Now we move to the celebration.
The Walima.
Part 4, the Walima, the wedding banquet. But the big question here is, how do we fulfill this sunnah without falling into the exact financial ruin we just discussed earlier?
Well, the Walima is a highly stressed sunnah. And as Dr. Mustafa Dib al-Bugan notes in the sources, attending a valid Walima when invited is generally considered an obligation wajib upon the believer.
Because it publicizes the marriage, right?
Yes, it publicizes the marriage and shares communal joy. However, this obligation drops immediately if the banquet involves prohibited elements like alcohol, free mixing that violates boundaries, or gross, sinful extravagance.
There is a massive spiritual weight attached to this food. Habib Umar bin Hafiz brings a profound esoteric lens to the walima here.
His insight is so beautiful.
It is. He points out that the physical food served carries spiritual consequences. The Prophet Muhammad warned that the worst food is that of a wedding banquet, where only the rich are invited and the poor are deliberately ignored.
The guest list is literally a spiritual metric.
Yes.
The walima must transcend socioeconomic boundaries. It is designed to be a social equalizer, bringing the wealthy and the destitute to the exact same table to celebrate a sacred union.
I want to share a real-world example synthesized from our sources. I call it the anti-inflation walima.
Oh, I love this.
So you have a working-class couple. They're facing immense, crushing cultural pressure from their families to host a 500-person luxury wedding in a hotel.
Classic scenario.
Right. And to afford it, they would have to take out a massive interest-bearing loan from a bank.
Which means engaging in riba interest, which is a major destructive sin in Islam.
Exactly. They would be starting a sacred union by declaring war on God through interest. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf frequently warns that baraka, divine blessing, cannot physically coexist with riyah, which is showing off or ostentation.
It just repels the blessing.
So this couple, they reject the cultural innovation. They host their nikah at the local mosque on a Friday after prayers. Their walima is a modest, home-cooked dinner in the community hall, and here's the key. They specifically invite local refugee families, impoverished international students, and the mosque janitors to eat alongside their own relatives.
They fulfilled the divine mandate perfectly.
They really did. They rejected financial ruin, they avoided riba, and they elevated the poor. They started their marriage completely debt-free, surrounded by true communal prayers of gratitude, rather than the superficial glitz of people judging the centerpieces.
That is true success. That's what the fiqh intends.
But, as we begin to wrap up this deep dive, it wouldn't be intellectually honest if we didn't address the systemic gaps.
We have to.
The text doesn't shy away from where classical fiqh creates extreme friction with modern reality.
It confronts these friction points directly. First, we have what we can call the minority chaos regarding the wali.
Right, going back to that.
We discuss the split between the Hanafi allowance for a woman to self-marry and the majority requirement of a wali. In a homogeneous classical society, this was fine. Everyone followed the local standard.
But today,
But in Western diaspora communities, mosques are melting pots of different madhabs. If a woman follows Hanafi fiqh and marries without a wali, but her local community operates strictly under Shafi fiqh, her marriage might be viewed with intense suspicion or even rejected by her peers as invalid.
which creates a massive, agonizing crisis of legitimacy for the couple.
It does. And while scholars like Ali Goma try to bridge this by treating state civil registration as a form of public guardianship that satisfies the spirit of the wali, the theological friction on the ground level between families of different backgrounds, it remains a highly volatile issue.
It's messy.
Mm.
And then there's the incredibly sensitive issue of the age of consent.
Yes.
If you look at classical texts, they relied on bulu, biological puberty, and rushed, mental maturity, to determine when someone could marry. Historically, in agrarian societies where life expectancy was much lower, that meant marriages happened at a much younger age. But how do scholars reconcile that with today?
This is a prime example of the fiqh evolving through legal maxims. Modern scholars universally utilize the maxim of dar al-mafsada,
Preventing harm.
preventing harm. This maxim supersedes theoretical historical permissibility. Scholars look at modern psychology, the demands of modern education, and the realities of modern child exploitation. They mandate strict adherence to civil 18-year-old laws. The objective of the Shariah is protection, and that requires adapting the law to modern understandings of developmental and psychological maturity. Permitting child marriages today causes catastrophic harm, so it is categorically blocked by the overarching objectives of the law.
Which makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
And finally, we have to revisit the enforcement gap in divorce.
The mu'allaka crisis.
Yeah, we talked about how stipulations like talaq al-tafwid are an amazing tool.
Yeah.
But what if a woman didn't know to write those stipulations into her contract?
That happens all the time.
She needs a wife-initiated divorce. But if her vindictive husband ignores a diaspora Shariah council because that council has no state power, no police force to compel him to sign the religious divorce, she is thrown right back into that agonizing religious suspension.
It highlights a painful reliance on personal ethics in the diaspora. When centralized, state-backed religious authority is missing, the system relies entirely on the taqwa, the fear of God, in the hearts of individuals. When a husband lacks that fear, the decentralized system struggles immensely to protect the vulnerable woman.
So, we have covered an immense amount of ground today. From the divine blueprint of worldview and sanctuary in the Quran, to the psychological fuses of digital DMs, to the rigorous protective mechanics of the contract itself, and the spiritual weight of the walima.
It's a lot to process.
It is. But if we pull all this together, what is the core message for the listener navigating this today?
The ultimate provocative takeaway here is that Islamic jurisprudence is not, and was never meant to be, a static, archaic checklist that you blindly stumble through.
Right.
It is a dynamic, breathing, legal framework designed to map onto the infinite complexities of the human condition. But its success depends entirely on our religious literacy.
We have to educate ourselves.
We have to move past localized, toxic cultural rituals. We have to embrace the maqasid, the profound ethical, spiritual, and psychological objectives the Shariah actually seeks to protect.
If a legal rule or a cultural tradition is being weaponized to oppress someone, to financially ruin a young couple, or to trap a woman in abuse, rather than to protect and elevate them, then we have completely lost the plot.
The divine blueprint is perfect. It is our human execution of it that requires constant, rigorous refining.
You cannot build a sanctuary if you are misreading the divine blueprints. This has been such an incredible, heavy, but absolutely necessary journey. We want to thank you, the listener, for walking this path with us, for navigating these complex jurisprudential waters, and for seeking the knowledge that builds stronger, more beautiful foundations for our families.
It's been an honor.
Jazakallah. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time with us. Connect with us. Connect with us. Join our growing family on this sacred journey of Islamic knowledge. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated. Your support helps us spread this message of peace and beauty further. Connect with us. May Allah grant us all the strength to follow the path of truth, increase our knowledge, and accept our humble deeds. Ameen. May the message of peace, tolerance, and harmony of Islam reach every heart.